In the unforgiving heat of the 1874 Arizona Territory, a contract was signed that broke every law of God and man. Most history books won't tell you about the flesh debts of the frontier, where a man's gambling losses could cost his family their freedom. But the story of Alani Vance is different. She wasn't just a victim of the Wild West. She was a currency, traded away exactly 14 minutes after taking her first breath as a mother. Her husband sold her to save his own skin, but he made one fatal calculation. He didn't expect who would step out of the shadows to buy her. This isn't just a story of survival. It is a brutal, true-to-life account of betrayal, vengeance, and an Apache warrior who understood honor better than any civilized man. This is the story of how Alani Vance was sold and how she fought to take back what was hers. The storm outside the Vance homestead was violent, a mirror to the agony tearing through Alani Vance's body. The year was 1874, and the Arizona monsoon season had turned the dry creek beds near Bisbee into raging torrents. Inside the drafty timber cabin, the smell of iron and boiled water hung heavy in the humid air. "Push, Alani! For the love of God, one more time!" Mrs. Gable, the midwife from the neighboring ranch, shouted over the roar of thunder. Alani gripped the iron frame of the bed, her knuckles white, her scream lost in the crack of lightning that illuminated the room. With a final, earth-shattering effort, the pressure released. A moment of terrifying silence followed, broken only by the drumming of rain on the tin roof until a thin, watery cry pierced the gloom. "It's a boy," Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice trembling not with joy, but with exhaustion. She quickly wrapped the infant in a rough wool blanket. "A healthy boy, Alani." Alani fell back against the sweat-stained pillow, her chest heaving. She reached out weak arms. Let me see him." But before Mrs. Gable could hand the child over, the front door of the cabin banged open. The wind howled into the room, extinguishing 2 of the kerosene lamps and sending shadows dancing wildly across the walls. Silas Vance stood in the doorway. He was a handsome man, usually, with the kind of slick charm that worked well in the saloons of Tucson. But tonight, he looked like a cornered rat. His expensive frock coat was soaked, his hair plastered to his skull, and his eyes darted around the room with a manic energy that made Alani's stomach turn. "Silas?" Alani whispered, clutching the sheets. "We have a son. Look at him." Silas didn't look at the baby. He didn't look at his wife. He pulled a gold pocket watch from his vest, checking the time with shaking hands. "Is it done? Is she finished?" Mrs. Gable bristled, clutching the baby tighter. "She's just given birth, Mr. Vance. Have you no decency? Come look at your heir." "I don't have time for decency," Silas snapped, slamming the door shut against the wind. He walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. "They're here. They're early." Alani felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the winter draft. "Who is here, Silas? Who is coming to the house at this hour?" Silas turned to her. In the dim light, she saw the bruise on his cheekbone, the split lip he had tried to hide. "I tried to win it back, Alani. I swear on my mother's grave, I had the hand. 3 queens. It should have been enough." "Win what back?" Alani tried to sit up, but pain spiked through her hips, forcing her down. "Silas, you promised me. No more tables. No more debts." "It's not just money this time," Silas said, his voice cracking. He walked to the bedside, but he didn't reach for her hand. He reached for the bundle of clothes she had prepared for the morning. "It's the deed, the livestock, and the collateral." Heavy boots stomped onto the porch. Not one pair. 3. The door didn't open this time. It was kicked in. The wood splintered near the latch. 3 men stepped into the sanctuary of the birthing room. The leader was a man known in the territory only as Judge Pearsall, not because he sat on a bench, but because he executed sentences on those who couldn't pay. He was a mountain of a man, smelling of wet leather and stale cigar smoke. "Silas," Pearsall grunted, water dripping from the brim of his hat onto the floorboards. "Time's up." "I have the deed right here," Silas stammered, fumbling in his coat pocket. "The ranch is yours. Every acre. Just take it and go." Pearsall laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The ranch is sand and snakes, Silas. We assessed it. It don't cover the $3,000 you owe the syndicate. Not even half." I have the horses," Silas pleaded. Pearsall shook his head. He looked past Silas, his dark eyes landing on Alani, who was pulling the sheet up to her neck, shivering. "We discussed the terms, Vance. If you couldn't pay in silver, you pay in trade. Labor. Flesh." Alani's heart hammered against her ribs. "Silas? What is he talking about?" Silas began to weep, pathetic silent tears that ran down his nose. "I didn't think I'd lose, Alani. I was sure." Pearsall stepped forward. "Grab her." "No!" Mrs. Gable screamed, trying to block the bed. "She's bleeding. She just delivered a child not 10 minutes ago. You'll kill her." One of Pearsall's men, a scarred gunfighter named Dooley, backhanded Mrs. Gable. She crumbled to the floor, the baby wailing in her arms. "Don't touch the boy," Pearsall commanded. "We ain't monsters. We don't take runts. Just the woman. She's strong. She's got good teeth. She'll fetch a price down in Sonora or the mining camps." Alani screamed as Dooley and the third man grabbed her arms. The pain was blinding as they dragged her from the blood-stained bed. She fought, clawing at Dooley's face, leaving deep red scratches. "Silas, help me! Silas, kill them!" Silas Vance stood in the corner, clutching the deed to the ranch that he had already lost, weeping into his hands. He didn't lift a finger. He didn't even look up as his wife was dragged across the rough wooden floor, her nightgown tearing, her body leaving a trail of blood. "My baby!" Alani shrieked, her voice tearing her throat raw. "Let me take my baby." "Baby stays," Pearsall said, tipping his hat to the weeping Silas. "Consider the debt settled, Vance. You keep your life. We take the wife. Clean slate." They dragged her out into the storm. The mud was cold and slick. They threw her into the back of a covered wagon like a sack of grain. As Alani lay there, gasping for air, listening to the thunder, the last thing she heard wasn't her husband's voice. It was the crying of her son, fading into the distance as the wagon lurched forward, carrying her into hell. The journey took 3 days. 3 days of darkness, fever, and the kind of despair that usually kills a person. Alani drifted in and out of consciousness. The bleeding had slowed, but the infection was setting in. She burned with fever. She didn't know where they were taking her, only that the air was getting hotter, drier. They stopped at a place called Dead Man's Wash, a lawless trading post near the Mexican border. It was a collection of tents and adobe shacks where things were sold that no legitimate market would touch. Stolen U.S. Army rifles, rustled cattle, and human beings. Pearsall dragged Alani out of the wagon. She was weak, barely able to stand, wearing only the tattered remains of her nightgown and a horse blanket Dooley had thrown at her. Her dark hair was matted, her face gaunt, but her eyes, green and burning, were clear. She had stopped crying 2 days ago. Now, there was only a cold resolve. I will survive, she told herself. I will survive to kill Silas Vance. She looks half dead, Judge, Dooley muttered, spitting tobacco into the dust. Who's going to buy damaged goods? She's young, Pearsall said, shoving Alani toward a circular corral where a few other unfortunate souls sat in chains. And she's pretty enough when she's cleaned up. Put her on the block, fast, before she collapses. The block was a crate in the center of the muddy thoroughfare. Men gathered, miners with coal dust eyes, banditos with silver spurs, and corrupt soldiers. They looked at her with hungry, predatory eyes. Alani stood on the crate, swaying. She locked her knees to keep from falling. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crawl. Gentlemen, Pearsall bellowed, acting the part of the carnival barker. Fresh from the homestead, a strong woman, literate, domesticated, a rare flower in this desert. $5, a toothless trapper shouted. 10, yelled a man in a greasy suit. Pearsall scoffed. Insulting. The starting bid is 50. This is a white woman, healthy stock. The bidding stalled at $40. Alani felt the darkness encroaching on her vision. She was going to be sold for the price of a good saddle. She closed her eyes, praying for death to take her before one of these men did. $100. The voice was deep, resonant, and carried a strange accent. It cut through the chaotic noise of the crowd like a knife. The crowd parted. A rider sat atop a massive paint horse. He was terrifying to behold. He wore buckskins, but they were reinforced with U.S. cavalry leather. His hair was long and black, bound with strips of red cloth, but he wore a flat-brimmed hat, low over his eyes. He carried a Winchester rifle in a scabbard and a heavy knife at his belt. He was Apache, Chiricahua, the enemy of every white man in the territory. A ripple of tension went through the crowd. Hands hovered over holsters. We don't sell to Indians, Pearsall sneered, though his hand drifted toward his own pistol. Get moving, Red. The rider didn't flinch. He reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. He tossed it. It landed at Pearsall's feet with the heavy, unmistakable clink of gold. Gold is not red or white, the Apache said calmly. Inside is $500 in Union gold. Double eagles. The silence was absolute. $500 was a fortune. It was enough to build a saloon or buy a herd. Pearsall looked at the pouch, then at the Apache, then at his men. Greed warred with prejudice in his eyes. Greed won. It always did with men like Pearsall. Count it, Dooley, Pearsall barked. Dooley checked the coins. He nodded, his eyes wide. It's real, boss. Pearsall grinned, showing yellow teeth. Well then, sold to the highest bidder. Unshackle her. Dooley unlocked the chain around Alani's ankle. She stumbled, falling off the crate into the dust. The Apache nudged his horse forward. He didn't speak. He simply extended a hand down toward her. Alani looked up. Beneath the brim of his hat, she saw a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. A scar ran down his left cheek. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but they didn't hold the lust she saw in the other men. They held something else. Pity? Anger. She hesitated. She had been raised to fear the Apache above all else. Stories of scalping and torture filled her childhood. But looking back at Pearsall and the jeering crowd, she realized the monsters weren't the ones in the stories. They were the ones who looked just like her husband. She reached up. The warrior gripped her forearm. His grip was iron strong, but not painful, and swung her up behind him on the horse with effortless strength. You're making a mistake, Red, a miner shouted. She's sick. She'll die on you before you get to your camp." The Apache turned his horse, looking at the crowd one last time. "If she dies free of this place." He kicked the horse into a gallop. They thundered out of Dead Man's Wash, leaving the dust and the Devil's Auction behind. Alani held on to the stranger's waist, the smell of sage and horse sweat filling her nose as they rode toward the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. As the adrenaline faded, the pain returned. Alani's grip loosened. She slumped against the warrior's back. "Hold on," he said, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Do not sleep yet, Alani Vance." Her eyes snapped open. The wind whipped her hair across her face. "How?" she rasped, her throat dry as bone. "How do you know my name?" The warrior didn't answer. He just spurred the horse faster, riding as if the hounds of hell were snapping at their heels. They rode for hours, climbing higher into the unforgiving terrain of the dragoons. This was Apache country, land where the U.S. cavalry feared to tread. The air grew cooler, thinner. Alani barely remembered the journey. It was a blur of red rocks, twisting canyons, and the rhythmic pounding of hooves. When they finally slowed, it was dusk. They entered a hidden box canyon, shielded on all sides by towering rock walls. It was a natural fortress, but it wasn't a war camp. There were no other warriors, no fires, no teepees. There was a small, hidden cabin built into the cliff face, cleverly camouflaged with brush and timber. The warrior dismounted and gently pulled Alani down. She collapsed, her legs refusing to hold her. He caught her, carrying her into the cabin. It was surprisingly clean. There were drying herbs hanging from the ceiling, a cot with furs, and a small iron stove. He laid her on the cot. "Rest. I will make medicine." "Who are you?" Alani whispered, clutching the furs. She was terrified, yet too weak to fight. "I am Kalen," he said. He removed his hat, revealing a face that was both fierce and weary. "My mother was Apache. My father was Irish. I walk between worlds." He set about boiling water and crushing herbs, sage, willow bark, and something that smelled pungent and sharp. He moved with a precision that surprised her. He wasn't acting like a captor. He was acting like a doctor. "Why did you buy me?" Alani asked, tears finally leaking from her eyes. "What do you want from me?" Kalen brought a tin cup of the steaming brew to her lips. "Drink. It will stop the bleeding and the fever." She drank. It was bitter, vile, but warmth spread through her chest. "I did not buy you to own you," Kalen said, sitting back on a wooden stool. He cleaned his knife with a cloth, his eyes fixed on the fire. "I bought you because you are the wife of Silas Vance." Alani froze. "You know Silas?" Kalen's jaw tightened. "I know him. 3 years ago, I had a sister, Nalsi. She was beautiful. She went to the trading post in Bisbee to sell baskets. She never came home." He looked at Alani, his eyes burning with a quiet, intense rage. "Silas Vance and his friends, they found her. They used her. And when they were done, they killed her and buried her in a shallow grave on your ranch." Alani gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, Silas is a gambler, a fool, but he isn't a murderer." "Is he?" Kalen asked softly. "He sold his own wife and newborn child to pay a debt. Do you really doubt what he is capable of?" The truth of it hit Alani like a physical blow. She remembered the night Silas would come home with muddy boots and blood on his shirt, claiming he'd been hunting. She remembered the way he looked at women as objects, not people. "I have been watching him," Kalen continued, "waiting for the moment to strike. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to lose everything. When I heard he was selling you, I knew. You knew what? That saving you would hurt him more than killing him, Kaylin said. Because you are the witness. You are the only one who can testify to what he did to you. And in the white man's world, a wife's testimony against a husband is rare. But the testimony of a woman sold into slavery? That will bring the hangman. Alani looked at the ceiling of the cabin, the herbs swaying in the draft. She thought of her baby, alone or with Mrs. Gable, miles away. She thought of Silas, probably drinking whiskey right now, celebrating his clean slate. A fire ignited in her belly, hotter than the fever. He has my son, Alani said, her voice shaking but hard. He left my son behind. Kaylin nodded. Then we will get him back. But first, you must heal. You cannot fight a war when you cannot stand. I don't know how to fight, Alani said. Kaylin looked at her, a small, grim smile touching his lips. You survived childbirth in a storm. You survived the auction. You survived the ride. You already know how to fight, Alani. I will just teach you how to kill. Time in the Dragoon Mountains did not pass in hours or days. It passed in the healing of scabs and the hardening of calluses. For the first 2 weeks, Alani drifted in a haze of fever dreams. She saw her baby crying in the rain. She saw Silas laughing as he counted gold coins. She saw Pearsall's dead eyes. But every time she woke screaming, Kaylin was there, a silent sentinel by the fire, sharpening his knife or repairing leather tack. By the 3rd week, the fever broke. Alani stood on the porch of the hidden cabin, weak as a newborn foal, looking out over the vast, red-earthed canyon. You can stand, Kaylin said, walking up from the creek with 2 trout strung on a line. That is good. Tomorrow, we work. Work? Alani leaned against the doorframe, her nightgown now stitched and clean, though it hung loosely on her gaunt frame. I need to go back, Kaylin. My son, he needs me. Kaylin stopped. He dropped the fish into a bucket. If you go back now, you are nothing but a ghost. You are weak. You are unarmed. Silas will put you in an asylum or a grave before you reach the front porch. To take back what is yours, you must kill the woman who was sold. You must become someone else. The training began the next morning at dawn. It was brutal. Kaylin was not a gentle teacher. He did not pity her. He treated her as he would a young brave. He handed her the Winchester rifle. It was heavy, smelling of oil and steel. This is the '73 model, he said, the gun that won the West. But a gun is just a tool. It is useless if the hand shakes. He made her hold the rifle, aimed at a distant rock, until her muscles screamed and tears streamed down her face. When she dropped it, he made her pick it up again. Pain is information, he told her as she sat by the fire one evening, rubbing her bruised shoulder. It tells you you are alive. Silas Vance thinks you are dead. Use that. The dead do not feel pain. The dead do not hesitate. He taught her to track. He showed her how a bent twig or a disturbed patch of gravel told a story. He taught her to move silently across the scree, stepping where the earth was solid, breathing in rhythm with the wind so her scent would carry away from prey. But the hardest lesson was the knife. One afternoon, Kaylin caught a rattlesnake. He pinned it with a forked stick, its rattle buzzing like a death knell. He handed Alani his heavy Bowie knife. Kill it, he ordered. Alani recoiled. I can't. It's defenseless. It is venom, Kaylin snapped. If you let it go, it will bite you when you sleep. Silas is a snake, Alani. Pearsall is a snake. You cannot hesitate when you look them in the eye. If you hesitate, Your son grows up an orphan." Alani looked at the snake, its black tongue flickering. She thought of Silas standing in the corner of the bedroom, checking his pocket watch while she was dragged away. The hesitation vanished. She drove the knife down, clean, decisive. That night, they ate the snake roasted over the fire. It tasted like chicken, tough and stringy. "You asked me why I live alone," Kalen said, breaking a long silence. The firelight danced on his scar. "My father was an Irish soldier. My mother was Chiricahua. The whites call me a savage. The Apache call me a half-breed. I belong nowhere." He looked at her, his dark eyes softening for the first time. "But out here, in the silence, we are just people surviving. You are becoming strong, Alani. Stronger than Silas ever deserved." Alani looked at her hands. They were rough, stained with dirt and gunpowder. She didn't recognize them. They weren't the hands of a rancher's wife anymore. They were the hands of a hunter. "I'm ready," she said softly. "I'm ready to go back." While Alani was forging herself into a weapon in the mountains, Silas Vance was living a life of fragile luxury in the valley. The Vance ranch had changed. With the debt settled, Silas had managed to leverage the remaining livestock to secure a new loan from a Tucson bank. He hired hands, rough men with questionable pasts who didn't ask why there was no mistress of the house. He told everyone Alani had died in childbirth, a tragic fever that took her mind and then her life. He even staged a funeral, burying a coffin filled with rocks in the family plot. Mrs. Gable, the midwife, had been silenced. Silas had paid her off with $50 and a threat that if she spoke, the syndicate would pay her a visit. She had taken the money and fled to California, leaving the baby, little William, in the care of a wet nurse Silas had hired, a sour-faced woman named Widow Hatcher. Silas sat on his porch, sipping expensive whiskey, watching the sunset. He should have been happy. He was free of debt. He had his ranch. But he couldn't sleep. Every shadow looked like a judge. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like Alani's scream. A rider approached up the long, dusty drive. It wasn't a ranch hand. It was Dooley, Pearsall's scarred henchman. Silas's stomach dropped. He stood up, his hand hovering near the Colt Navy revolver he now wore on his hip. "What do you want, Dooley?" "We're square." Dooley didn't dismount. He spat a stream of brown tobacco juice onto Silas's clean porch steps. "Judge Pearsall sends his regards. We got a problem, Vance." "I don't have problems," Silas said, his voice trembling slightly. "I have a receipt." "Yeah. Well, receipts don't stop rumors," Dooley sneered. "One of our scouts was down near the Dragoons. Saw smoke. Went to investigate. He saw a man, a big half-breed Apache on a paint horse. And he saw a woman." Silas felt the blood drain from his face. The glass of whiskey slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "A woman?" "White woman," Dooley nodded. "Dark hair. Pretty, but looking rough. She was shooting a Winchester, Vance. Hitting targets at 300 yards. Your wife ain't dead. And she ain't a slave in Mexico. She's with the Apache, and she's arming up." Silas grabbed the porch railing to keep from collapsing. If Alani was alive, if she came back, she could tell the sheriff everything. Selling a white woman to an Indian? That wasn't just a crime. In the Arizona Territory, that was a hanging offense. The mob would tear him apart before a trial could even start. She must be a captive," Silas stammered, his mind racing, spinning a new web of lies. "She was kidnapped. That savage took her." Dooley laughed. "She didn't look like no captive, Silas. She looked like a partner. But the judge, he don't like loose ends. If she talks, she implicates us too. We can't have that. What do we do? Silas asked, desperate. We finish it, Dooley said, but we do it legal-like. You go into town tomorrow. You find Marshal Thaddeus Cole. You tell him your grief-stricken story. You tell him you got a tip that the renegade Apache who kidnapped your wife is hiding in the Dragoons. You get a posse. We'll join it. And when we find them... Dooley drew a thumb across his throat. We make sure the Apache dies resisting arrest. And the woman. Tragic crossfire. Silas nodded, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool evening air. It was a monstrous plan, but he was already a monster. He had crossed that line the night he signed the contract. There was no going back now. I'll go to town at first light, Silas whispered. Inside the house, the baby, William, began to cry. Silas didn't move to comfort him. He just stared at the darkening horizon, terrified of what was coming out of the mountains. The posse was 12 men strong. It was led by Marshal Thaddeus Cole, a grizzled lawman with a handlebar mustache and a reputation for being honest but hard. Silas rode beside him, playing the role of the distraught husband to perfection. He wore black, his eyes rimmed with red, mostly from a sleepless night of drinking. Behind them rode Pearsall's men, Dooley and 4 other gunslingers deputized for the occasion. The rest were townspeople, eager to kill an Apache and rescue a white woman. They found the trail easily. Too easily. He's sloppy, Marshal Cole grunted, looking at the heavy hoof prints leading into the box canyon. Doesn't cover his tracks. He's arrogant, Silas said, wiping sweat from his neck. He thinks he's safe up there. They rode into the canyon just past noon. The sun was high, baking the red rock walls until they radiated heat like an oven. The canyon narrowed, the walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. It was quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Hold up, Cole said, raising a gloved hand. He scanned the ridges. This feels wrong. It's a kill box. He's just one Indian, Marshal, Dooley shouted from the back. Let's ride in and flush him out. Before Cole could answer, a crack of thunder echoed through the canyon. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The man riding next to Dooley jerked backward, a hole appearing in his shoulder. The report of the rifle reached them a second later. Crack. Ambush! Cole screamed. Cover! Get to cover! The canyon erupted. But it wasn't a chaotic barrage of fire. It was precise, methodical shooting. From the high ridge to the left, a puff of white smoke. A riderless horse bolted. Silas threw himself off his horse, scrambling behind a large boulder. He was hyperventilating. They're killing us! You said she was a captive. Cole was firing blindly at the ridge with his revolver. That ain't one shooter, Vance. That's crossfire. There's 2 of them. High up on the limestone shelf, Alani Vance cycled the lever of her Winchester. She was calm. Her heart was beating slow and steady. She wasn't Alani the victim anymore. She was the storm. A just left? Kalen's voice came from the rocks 10 yards away. Wind is picking up. I see him, Alani whispered. She looked through the iron sights. She saw Dooley, the man who had backhanded Mrs. Gable, the man who had chained her. He was crouching behind a dead log, trying to reload his repeater. She exhaled. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Down below, Dooley's hat flew off, and he collapsed backward, clutching his leg. A scream of agony echoed off the walls. Leg shot, Alani stated, no emotion in her voice. Good, Kalen said. A wounded man takes 2 men out of the fight to help him. Down in the canyon, chaos reigned. The posse was pinned down. They couldn't see their attackers. They could only see the muzzle flashes from the high ground. "We have to pull back," Cole roared. "We're sitting ducks." "No!" Silas screamed, grabbing the marshal's arm. "You have to kill them. If they get away. If we stay, we die." Cole shoved Silas away. "Mount up. Retreat. Pull back to the canyon mouth." The posse broke. It was a rout. They dragged the wounded Dooley onto a horse and galloped back the way they came, kicking up a cloud of dust that obscured their escape. High on the ridge, Kalen lowered his rifle. He looked at Alani. She hadn't moved. She was still watching the dust settle, her finger resting on the trigger guard. "They are running," Kalen said. "They will be back," Alani replied, turning to him. Her eyes were hard, the green irises bright against her dirt-streaked face. "And next time, they will bring an army. We can't stay here, Kalen." "No," Kalen agreed. "We have lost the element of surprise. The marshal is a good man, but he is being led by liars. He will return with the cavalry if he thinks we are a threat." "Then we stop running," Alani said. She stood up, silhouetted against the harsh sun. "Silas came here to kill me because he is afraid. He is afraid I will tell the truth. We don't need to defeat the marshal, Kalen. We just need to get to him. We need to go to the ranch." Kalen looked at her with respect. She was proposing a suicide mission, riding right into the heart of the enemy's territory, but it was the only play they had left. "Tonight," Kalen said. "We ride tonight. We finish this where it started." "For William," Alani whispered. "For Nalsi," Kalen added. They gathered their gear. The defensive war was over. The invasion was about to begin. The moon was buried behind thick banks of indigo clouds as Alani and Kalen approached the perimeter of the Vance Ranch. It was midnight. The air was heavy with static, the smell of ozone predicting another violent storm. A bookend to the night Alani's life had been stolen. They left the horses a mile back in a dry wash. They moved on foot, shadows detaching themselves from the darkness. "The barn first," Kalen whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustle of the wind through the mesquite. "Pearsall's men are quartered there. If they hear shots from the house, they will flank us." Alani nodded. She wore a pair of men's trousers Kalen had scavenged, a gun belt strapped around her waist, and her Winchester in her hands. She looked at the house, the windows glowing with the warm yellow light of kerosene lamps. Somewhere inside that house was her son, and somewhere inside was the man who had sold her. "Do not hesitate," Kalen reminded her. He handed her his long knife. "Guns are loud. The knife is silent. If you meet resistance before we are ready, you know what to do." Kalen melted into the dark toward the barn. Alani moved toward the main house. She crept up the porch steps, avoiding the one that creaked, a sound she had memorized in a previous life. She peered through the parlor window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Silas was there, pacing the rug, a glass of whiskey in his hand. But he wasn't alone. Judge Pearsall sat in Silas's favorite leather armchair, his muddy boots resting on the ottoman. Dooley, leg bandaged and propped up on a chair, was cleaning a pistol. And in the corner, in a wooden cradle that Alani recognized as the one her father had carved, was William. "Stop pacing, Silas," Pearsall growled. "You're making me dizzy." "They're out there," Silas muttered, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "I can feel it. That Apache. He's a demon. And Alani? She's not Alani anymore. You saw how she shot Dooley." Lucky shot, Dooley grunted, though he looked pale. We have the marshal's deputies patrolling the perimeter, Pearsall said dismissively. And come morning, I've sent a telegram to Governor Safford in Tucson. We'll have the army here by noon to hunt down your renegades. Governor Safford won't help you if he finds out about the sale, Silas hissed. Kidnapping is one thing. Slavery? That brings the feds. Pearsall stood up slowly. He walked over to Silas, towering over the smaller man. Who is going to tell them, Silas? Your wife is dead, remember? She's outside. If she comes inside, Pearsall said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, we kill her. Self-defense. A crazed woman who joined the Apaches attacked her loving husband. It's a tragedy. We bury her for real this time. Alani pressed her back against the siding of the house. She closed her eyes. They are going to kill me. They are going to kill Kaylin. And then they will raise my son with blood on their hands. She heard a sound from the barn. A muffled thump, like a sack of grain hitting the floor. Then silence. Kaylin was doing his work. Alani checked the chamber of her Winchester. She didn't wait for Kaylin. She couldn't. Silas was walking toward the cradle. She kicked the front door open. The lock shattered. The door swung inward, banging against the wall. The wind howled into the room, blowing out the lamp nearest the door. Silas! Alani screamed. Silas spun around, dropping his glass. Pearsall went for his gun. Dooley fumbled with his pistol. Alani didn't look at her husband. She looked at the threat. She leveled the rifle at Pearsall. Don't, she warned. Pearsall froze, his hand halfway to his holster. He squinted into the gloom. Well, the prodigal wife returns. You look terrible, darling. Step away from my son, Alani commanded, stepping into the room. The barrel of the rifle didn't waver. Alani, Silas whispered. He looked at her as if seeing a ghost. She was thin, scarred, dressed in rags and leather, with eyes that held the cold abyss of the grave. Alani, I didn't mean for... You sold me, Alani said, her voice cutting through his stammering. For $3,000. You sold me, and you kept the receipt. I had no choice, Silas cried, falling to his knees. They were going to kill me. You should have let them, Alani said. Enough of this soap opera, Dooley shouted, raising his gun. Crack. The window behind Dooley shattered inward. A bullet struck Dooley in the chest before he could pull the trigger. He slumped back into his chair, dead. Pearsall spun toward the window, firing blindly into the night. We're under attack. Boys, get in here. Your boys are sleeping. Kaylin's voice came from the open doorway behind Alani. He stepped in, his knife dripping dark fluid onto the floorboards. They will not wake up. Pearsall looked at Kaylin, then at Alani. He realized for the first time that his money and his size meant nothing here. He grabbed Silas by the collar, hauling him up and pulling a knife to Silas's throat. Back off! Pearsall roared, using Silas as a human shield. Back off, or I open him up. I'll kill him. Alani lowered the rifle slightly. She looked at Silas, her husband, the father of her child, the man who was currently weeping, begging for his life. Alani, please, Silas shrieked. Save me. I'm your husband. I love you. Alani looked at Kaylin. Then she looked back at Pearsall. She tightened her grip on the rifle. He is not my husband, Alani said softly. He is your debt. She shifted her aim, not at Pearsall, but at the empty space to the left. Pearsall frowned, confused. What? Duck, Alani said. She wasn't talking to Silas. She was talking to the memory of the man Silas used to be. But Silas didn't duck. He did something Alani didn't expect. Maybe it was cowardice, Or maybe, in the final moment, he found a scrap of redemption. Silas bit Pearsall's hand. Pearsall roared, instinctively pulling the knife back to strike. In that split second of separation, Alani fired. The bullet caught Pearsall in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the knife. Kalen crossed the room in 2 strides, tackling the giant man. They crashed into the furniture, a whirlwind of fists and fury. Alani didn't watch the fight. She dropped her rifle and ran to the cradle. She scooped up William. The baby was wailing, terrified by the noise. She pulled him against her chest, smelling the milk and the fear, burying her face in his neck. "I've got you. I've got you. Mama is here." A gunshot rang out. Alani spun around, clutching the baby. Pearsall was on the ground, a hole in his forehead. Kalen stood over him, holding Pearsall's own fallen revolver. Silas was slumped against the wall, clutching his side. Pearsall's knife had found its mark during the scuffle. Blood was pooling beneath him. Silence fell over the room, heavy and absolute. The silence that followed the gunfire was heavier than the storm that had raged outside. The parlor of the Vance homestead, once a place of domestic pretense, was now a charnel house. The air was thick with the stinging haze of black powder smoke and the metallic copper tang of fresh blood. Alani stood by the cradle, her chest heaving. She held William so tight against her that the baby had stopped crying, lulled by the frantic but steady rhythm of her heart. She didn't look at the bodies of Pearsall or Dooley. Her eyes were fixed on the man slumped against the wainscoting. Silas Vance was trying to speak, but only a wet, bubbling sound escaped his lips. His hands, usually so manicured for handling cards, were slick with his own blood as he clutched the fatal wound in his side. Kalen moved first. He didn't go to Alani. He went to the window, peering out into the darkness through the shattered glass. "The shots were loud," Kalen said, his voice flat and practical. "If the law is near, they heard them. We have minutes, Alani." Alani finally moved. She walked slowly toward Silas. She didn't kneel. She stood over him, the hem of her tattered dress brushing his boot. "Alani," Silas rasped, his eyes losing focus. He looked up at her, trying to reconcile the memory of the soft, compliant wife he had sold with the warrior standing before him now. I bought it back. The ranch. I did it. For us." "You did it for yourself," Alani said, her voice devoid of the pity he was begging for. "You sold your wife and son to save your own skin, Silas. Don't lie to God now. You're about to meet him." Silas coughed, a violent spasm that left a streak of red on his chin. "They were going to kill me. I was terrified." "So was I," Alani whispered, shifting William in her arms. "I was terrified in the wagon. I was terrified on the auction block. I was terrified every night in the mountains, but I didn't sell you." The back door creaked open. Kalen spun, knife ready, but it was Mrs. Gable. The midwife had been hiding in the root cellar. She stood in the doorway, her hands covering her mouth as she surveyed the carnage. When her eyes landed on Alani, she let out a sob. "Oh, sweet Jesus," Mrs. Gable cried, rushing forward. "Alani, child, is it really you?" "It's me, Martha," Alani said softly. "Check him. See if he can be saved." Mrs. Gable knelt beside Silas, pressing a towel to the wound. She looked up at Alani and shook her head grimly. The knife had done its work. The debt was being collected. "The sun is coming," Kalen warned from the window. "Dust on the road. Riders." Alani looked at the Apache warrior. He was covered in grime, exhausted, a man who had walked into hell for a woman he owed nothing to. You should go, Kalen. If the marshal finds you here with these bodies, there will be no trial. Kalen holstered the revolver he had taken from Pearsall. He looked at the back door, then at Alani. I do not leave my pack behind. I am not your pack anymore, Alani said, her voice trembling slightly. I am safe. You finished your mission. Go. Kalen hesitated. For the first time, the stoic mask slipped, revealing a flash of deep, sorrowful respect. But before he could move, the sound of galloping hooves thundered in the yard. Marshals! A voice roared from outside. Surround the house. Come out with your hands high. It was too late. Alani handed the baby to Mrs. Gable. Take William to the kitchen. Stay down. Alani, go. Alani picked up her Winchester from the floor. She walked to the front door, stepping over Pearsall's corpse. She opened it and stepped out onto the porch. The morning light was blinding, cutting across the Dragoon Mountains in shafts of gold. Marshal Thaddeus Cole sat atop his horse, flanked by 6 deputies, all with rifles trained on her chest. Cole blinked. He lowered his rifle an inch. Mrs. Vance? Marshal, Alani said calmly. She rested the butt of the rifle on the porch boards. We heard shooting, Cole said, his eyes darting to the broken window. And we have a report from town that you were kidnapped, that an Apache took you. A lot of lies have been told in this valley, Marshal, Alani said, but the lying is done. Step aside, ma'am, Cole ordered, dismounting. We need to secure the premises. Cole walked up the steps, his spurs chiming in the tense silence. He pushed past Alani into the parlor. He stopped dead. He saw the bodies. He saw the Apache standing by the fireplace, hands open but clearly dangerous. And he saw Silas Vance, breathing his last. Holy mother of, Cole muttered. He knelt beside Silas. Vance, who did this? Was it the Indian? The room seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment that would decide the rest of Alani's life. If Silas blamed Kalen or Alani, they would hang. Silas looked up at the marshal. His vision was fading, the edges of the room turning gray. He looked at Alani one last time. He saw the scars on her arms. He saw the strength in her jaw. And perhaps, in that final second, he realized that he was the villain of this story. No, Silas whispered, the word barely a breath. It was Pearsall, the syndicate. Cole leaned closer. Pearsall, the judge? He tried to kill us, Silas wheezed, gripping Cole's sleeve. He threatened my family. The Indian, he saved us. My wife, she's innocent. Silas's eyes drifted back to Alani. I'm sorry, he mouthed. The grip on Cole's sleeve loosened. The hand fell. Silas Vance was gone. Marshal Cole remained kneeling for a long moment. He looked at the dead body of Judge Pearsall, a man everyone knew was crooked, but no one dared to touch. He looked at the ledger sticking out of Pearsall's coat pocket, the ledger that likely contained the proof of every illegal debt and flesh trade in the territory. Cole stood up. He looked at Kalen. You, Cole said. You're the one from the canyon, the one who shot my deputy in the leg. He was trying to kill a woman, Kalen said calmly. I shot his leg. I could have shot his head. Cole stared at the warrior. The law demanded he arrest this man. But the West was changing. Justice wasn't always written in a law book. Cole looked at Alani, seeing the way she stood between the Apache and the lawman. Self-defense, Cole announced loudly, for the benefit of his deputies outside. It appears Judge Pearsall and his gang attempted a home invasion to collect on a gambling debt. Mr. Vance and this Scout. Defended the homestead. The deputies lowered their guns. What about the scout, Marshal? A deputy asked from the doorway. He's Chiricahua. Cole looked Kalen in the eye. He was just leaving, weren't you? Kalen nodded slowly. I have a long ride. Alani walked Kalen to the edge of the porch. The sun was fully up now, burning away the mist. Where will you go? She asked. North, Kalen said. The army is pressing hard in the south. I will go to the high country, to the snow. He swung himself onto his paint horse, which had wandered into the yard. He looked down at her. You are strong, Alani Vance. You are Inde, the people. I won't forget you, Kalen, she said, tears finally spilling over. You gave me my life back. No, Kalen corrected her, turning his horse toward the open gate. I only cut the ropes. You took the life back yourself. He kicked his horse into a gallop and didn't look back. Alani watched him until he was just a speck against the vast red horizon. 6 months later. The winter of 1874 was harsh, but the Vance Ranch, now renamed the Phoenix Valley Ranch, was warm. Alani sat on the wide porch, watching the sunset bleed purple and orange across the sky. The ranch had changed. The gambling tables were burned for firewood. The whiskey was poured into the dust. In the corral, 3 women were breaking horses. One was a widow from Tucson, another a runaway from a brothel in Bisbee, and the third was Mrs. Gable, who had decided she preferred horses to midwifery. Alani had given them a home, a wage, and a share of the profits. They were a strange family, a sorority of survivors who knew how to shoot as well as they knew how to sew. William, now a chubby, laughing toddler, pulled himself up on the railing of the porch. He babbled at the horses, his eyes bright and happy. He would never know Silas Vance. He would never know the man who sold him. He would only know the mother who fought the world to get him back. Alani sipped her coffee. She picked up the local newspaper from the table. The headline read, Syndicate Ring Smashed. Ledger reveals frontier slavery ring. Because of her testimony, the federal marshals had swept through the territory. The flesh markets at Dead Man's Wash were burned to the ground. Pearsall's associates were in chains. She set the paper down and looked at her hands. They were calloused, strong, and capable. She touched the Winchester leaning against her chair. She didn't carry it out of fear anymore. She carried it as a promise. A coyote howled in the distance, a lonely, wavering sound. Alani smiled. She wasn't afraid of the wild anymore. She was part of it. She picked up William, balancing him on her hip. Look at that sun, William, she whispered, pointing to the fiery descent of the day. It goes down, but it always comes back up, just like us. She turned and walked back into the house, closing the door firmly against the night, the master of her own fate, the queen of her own castle, finally and forever free. Alani Vance's story is a brutal reminder that in the Wild West, the most dangerous predators weren't always wolves or bears. Sometimes they were the men sitting across the dinner table. Alani didn't just survive slavery. She dismantled the system that tried to own her. It begs the question, if you were in her shoes, standing in that parlor with a rifle in your hand, could you have shown Silas the mercy she did? Or would you have pulled the trigger? This story comes from the hidden archives of the Arizona Territory, a testament to the strength of a mother's love. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us find more lost history like this. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a chaotic tale from the frontier. Share this video with someone who thinks they know the Wild West. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.